I was in the supermarket checkout line, lost in my thoughts, when something caught my eye. In front of me, a small boy, maybe 9 years old, was standing. His eyes darted from the items on the counter to the nearly empty wallet in his hand, reflecting a mix of anxiety and worry that didn't match his age. As the line moved slowly, I watched the boy try to calculate the value of his purchases and count the few coins he had. His frustration was evident. The cashier, a middle-aged woman with a tired expression, waited patiently as he tried to rearrange the items, perhaps hoping to be able to pay for them all. Finally, with a resigned sigh, the boy raised his head and looked at the box. "Sorry, ma'am," he said shyly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't have enough money for everything." There was a genuine sadness in his eyes, as if he was already used to this situation. The cashier sighed and began sorting the items, probably so he could only take what he could afford. The scene was heartbreaking, and I felt a surge of compassion and an irresistible desire to help. "Wait," I said, stepping forward. "I'll cover what's missing." I pulled some bills out of my wallet and handed them to the cashier, who looked at me in surprise but gratitude. The boy looked at me with wide eyes, visibly relieved and grateful. "Thank you, lady," he murmured, almost voiceless, as he picked up the shopping bags. "My father is sick at home, and I was worried about getting enough for our food." His words touched me deeply, and at that moment, I decided that I needed to know more about this boy's situation and help him in any way I could. Something about that situation made me uneasy. How did he, so little, take care of the shopping alone? The image of the boy trying to pay for the groceries and the mention of his sick father never left my mind. A feeling of worry and curiosity washed over me. I decided to follow the boy discreetly, just to make sure he got home safely. I kept a safe distance as he walked through the streets with surprising agility. Watching him, I realized he knew the path well, dodging obstacles with a confidence that seemed out of place for his age. The speed and determination in his steps showed that this was not the first time he had made this journey alone. As I followed him, my thoughts raced. What would happen to him when he got home? Was the father really sick, or was there something more behind the story? The questions piled up and increased my determination to find out more. We arrived at a modest neighborhood with simple, worn-out houses. The boy turned a corner and I followed him, trying to appear as inconspicuous as possible. I knew I was getting too involved, but something told me I needed to see this through to the end, make sure the boy was really safe. Finally, he stopped in front of a house that looked like it needed urgent repairs. He walked in without hesitation, and I approached slowly, staying close enough to observe but not be noticed. The initial curiosity turned into an urgent need to understand and, if possible, help in a more meaningful way. I accompanied the boy to a more remote neighborhood, where the houses were simple and showed signs of wear and tear due to time and lack of maintenance. He went to a particular house, whose paintwork was faded and the garden was unkempt. The place seemed to scream for care, reflecting an environment of desolation and abandonment. I stood there for a moment, watching from a distance as he opened the door with ease, like someone used to doing this every day. My heart beat faster as I approached silently, determined to better understand the situation. Carefully, I found a slightly open window that allowed me a partial view of the interior. Inside the house, the scene was desolate. The environment was poorly lit and disorganized, with old furniture and a layer of dust evident over everything. In the center of the room, there was a burly, unkempt-looking man sitting comfortably on the sofa. He was watching television and holding a can of beer in his hand. His expression was one of complete indifference to what was happening around him. I watched the boy walk in with the shopping bags, his small shoulders still carrying the weight of responsibility. He approached the man and handed over the purchases without saying a word. The man took the bag carelessly, without even looking up from the television. He mumbled something inaudible, perhaps a complaint or an irrelevant comment, and continued drinking, showing no sign of gratitude or recognition for his son's efforts. The boy, without receiving any kind of thanks, just nodded and began to put away the items carefully. The scene was painfully revealing. The father was clearly not sick as the boy had said. In fact, he seemed perfectly healthy, except for the obvious dependence on alcohol that made his presence even more oppressive and negligent. I stood paralyzed for a few minutes, observing that dysfunctional dynamic. The boy acted as if this was completely normal, a routine he was already used to following. My mind raced, trying to comprehend the extent of what was happening and how someone so young could carry such a heavy burden. As I processed all of this, my anger and sadness grew. The image of the father, indolent and oblivious to his son's sacrifice, contrasted sharply with the image of the boy, so young and already overwhelmed by life. It was clear he was being exploited by the one who was supposed to protect him. The decision to intervene became clear to me. I couldn't just turn away and pretend I hadn't seen anything. Something needed to be done to get the boy out of that situation and ensure that he had a chance to live a more dignified and safe childhood. As I walked away from the window, I felt a lump in my throat and a mix of conflicting emotions. The scene he had just witnessed was difficult to digest. The weight of responsibility that boy carried and his father's blatant negligence left me astonished. I stood outside for a few minutes, trying to process everything and think about what I should do. Every fiber of my being screamed for me to act. I couldn't just walk away and ignore the situation, knowing that this boy was in such a difficult situation. The decision to intervene took over me, and without thinking much, I went to the door of the house. With my heart racing, I knocked on the door and waited. A few seconds later, the boy opened it, his eyes showing a mixture of surprise and curiosity. "Hello," I began, trying to sound as casual as possible. "I'm the girl from the supermarket, the one who helped you with your shopping earlier. Can I speak to your father?" The boy hesitated for a moment, looking into the house, before stepping back and letting me inside. I crossed the threshold and was greeted by the disorganized environment and the aura of neglect. The father, still on the sofa, looked up from the television with a look of disdain and irritation. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice slurred by alcohol. I took a deep breath, trying to maintain calm and composure. "I'm the person who helped your son with his shopping today," I replied firmly. "He told me you're sick, but you seem to be fine. I'm worried about him and would like to know more about your situation." The man stared at me for a moment, before looking away and taking another sip of his beer. "He was mistaken," he said, with a bitter laugh. "I'm not sick, just tired of life." The anger and sadness I felt increased. It was evident that the father was sunk into alcoholism, leaving his son to shoulder responsibilities that were not his. My concern for the boy grew by the second, and I knew I needed to act to protect him. "I understand," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "But that's not fair to him. He needs help and support, not more problems. We need to find a solution so he can have a better life." The man just mumbled something inaudible and turned his attention to the television, ignoring my presence. The boy, on the other hand, looked at me with eyes full of hope and a silent plea for help. I knew I had made the right decision when I knocked on that door. The man got up from the sofa with some difficulty and came to the door, his eyes half closed from exhaustion and alcohol. Clearly surprised to see me, he frowned and asked sharply, "Who are you?" I took a deep breath, trying to remain calm in the face of his hostility. "I'm the person who helped your son with the shopping," I explained, trying to sound as calm and firm as possible. "He told me you're sick, but from what I saw, it looks like you're fine." Upon hearing my words, the man became visibly angry. His face turned red and he shot a quick, furious look at the boy, who was standing next to us, eyes wide and nervous. "He was mistaken," said the man, trying to justify himself. "I'm not sick, just tired from work." I observed him closely, noticing the signs of tiredness and the clear signs of alcohol abuse. It was clear he was trying to cover up the truth, but his attempt to lie only confirmed my suspicions. The boy had been trained to give that excuse, probably to avoid uncomfortable questions. "I understand," I replied, keeping my tone neutral, although inside I was seething with indignation. "But your son seems to be taking on too many responsibilities for someone his age. He deserves a childhood, not a life of worries and burdens." The man snorted, visibly uncomfortable with my presence and my questions. "We're doing the best we can," he said, with a defensive note in his voice. "Life is not easy for anyone." Before I could respond, the boy stepped forward, almost as if he wanted to intervene and protect his father from further embarrassment. "It's okay," he said, voice shaky but resolute. "I just want to help my dad." That statement, so simple and sincere, broke my heart. It was clear that the boy loved his father and wanted to do everything in his power to help, even if it meant sacrificing his own childhood. I knew I needed to find a way to help them, but in a way that didn't destroy the bond between father and son. I looked at the man, trying to see past his irritated and tired facade. There was a deep sadness in his eyes, something that indicated he, too, was lost and needed help. "Maybe we can find a solution together," I suggested softly. "Something that could improve both of your lives." The man didn't respond immediately, but there was a glimmer of hope in the boy's eyes. I knew this was just the beginning of a long journey, but I was determined to do what I could to bring a little light into that family's life. Later, after a tense conversation with the boy's father, I managed to get a moment alone with him. We sat in the small kitchen, and I offered him a glass of water, trying to create a more comfortable environment for him to open up. "Is your father really sick?" I asked, carefully. The boy hesitated, looking at the ground before answering. "He says he is," he began, his voice low and full of uncertainty. "But he always seems fine to me. I think he just doesn't want to leave the house." There was a palpable sadness in his words, a painful recognition of the reality he faced. My concern increased, and I felt the need to understand more about the family situation. "Is your mother?" I asked, softly. "Where is she?" The boy's eyes filled with tears, and he blinked rapidly, trying to hold back the tears. "My mother died 2 years ago," he replied, his voice shaking with the painful memory. "Since then, my father has started drinking a lot. He says he can't work because he's so sad." The revelation hit me like a punch in the stomach. The loss of her mother explained a lot, but it also made the situation even more tragic. The boy was dealing not only with the absence of a mother, but also with the burden of a father who had given in to alcoholism. "I'm sorry about that," she said sincerely, placing her hand on his shoulder in a gesture of comfort. "It must be very difficult for you." He nodded, biting his lower lip to keep from crying. "I try to help in any way I can," he confessed. "I do the shopping. I clean the house. I want my father to be well again, but I don't know what else I can do." The depth of his responsibility and maturity impressed and saddened me at the same time. He was carrying a huge weight for someone so young, and it wasn't fair. "You're doing an amazing job," I assured. "But that's a lot for a child. You deserve help and support too." The boy looked at me with a mixture of hope and fear. "Do you think you can help my father?" he asked, the vulnerability in his voice breaking my heart. "He used to be different before Mom died." "I'll do everything I can," I promised, determined not to let that boy face this fight alone. I knew the journey would be difficult, but I was ready to take the first step alongside them, seeking the help they needed to transform their lives. I was heartbroken to hear the boy's story. The reality was clear and painful. The father was sinking into alcoholism and taking advantage of his son's kindness and innocence to avoid his responsibilities. The depth of the situation left me stunned. I couldn't just walk away and ignore what was happening, but I needed to find a way to help without causing more harm. I spent the night thinking about how to approach the situation. The father needed help to overcome his addiction, but forcing him to do so could have unpredictable consequences. The boy, on the other hand, needed a safe environment and a childhood that had been stolen from him by tragedy and the weight of responsibility. The next morning, I contacted a local organization that offered support to families in crisis situations. I explained what I had witnessed and the urgent need for intervention, both to help the father rehabilitate and to ensure the boy was in a safe and healthy environment. While waiting for the organization's response, I continued visiting the boy, bringing him supplies and offering a shoulder to lean on. On one of these visits, I asked him about his dreams and what he would like to do if he had more free time. His eyes lit up with the idea of playing again and having a lighter life, a painful contrast to the reality he faced. Days passed and finally I received a positive response. The organization was willing to intervene and offer the necessary support to rehabilitate the father and protect the boy. I breathed a sigh of relief, knowing help was on the way. However, I knew the road would be long and full of challenges. As I shared the news with the boy, I saw a mixture of relief and anxiety on his face. "Does this mean my dad will get better?" he asked, hope shining in his eyes. "Yes," I replied, holding her small hands. "That means he'll have a chance to get better, and you'll have a chance to be a kid again." The journey was just beginning, but there was a light at the end of the tunnel. I was determined to follow each step, offering the necessary support so that the family could rebuild itself. The painful discovery I made in that house had turned into a mission of hope and renewal for both the boy and his father. After understanding the depth of the situation, I felt the urgent need to involve more people who could offer concrete help. I spoke to some close friends, explaining the situation between the boy and his father. Everyone was moved and willing to contribute in some way. In a meeting, we discussed different ways to support the family. One of my friends, who worked with a local organization that supports families in crisis, suggested that we involve that institution. We contacted them and explained the seriousness of the case, asking for help to monitor and intervene in the situation. The organization's response was quick and positive. They committed to sending social workers to assess the family environment and offer psychological and material support to the boy. Additionally, we organized a group of volunteers to help with household chores and basic supplies, ensuring that the boy did not have to carry all the responsibility alone. As the assessment and support process began, I remained in constant contact with the boy and his father. I explained to the boy that there were people willing to help and that he was no longer alone. His face lit up at the prospect of having support and seeing his father receive the treatment he needed. Social services were called to ensure the boy was protected and that his father was sent to a rehabilitation program. The process was delicate, but the social workers were understanding and dedicated to finding the best solution for both. In the days that followed, I closely observed the positive impact of the interventions. The boy began attending school regularly and participating in recreational activities provided by the organization. His face, previously full of concern, began to show signs of hope and joy. Meanwhile, the father began treatment for alcoholism, with regular therapy sessions and support from rehabilitation groups. There were difficult moments and setbacks, but the commitment to recovery was evident. The constant presence of dedicated professionals and volunteers made a significant difference. Seeing the gradual transformation in that family's life was incredibly rewarding. I knew the road was still long, but every little progress was a victory. Collaboration between friends, the local organization, and social services has shown that together we can make a real, positive difference to people's lives. Months later, the fruits of the joint effort began to manifest themselves in a clear and encouraging way. The boy was in a much better situation, with a happier and more energetic face. He attended school regularly, making up for lost time and performing admirably in class. The extracurricular activities provided by the local organization gave him the opportunity to explore new interests and make friends, something that previously seemed distant in his reality. The father, in turn, also showed signs of progress. Although the road to recovery was arduous and full of challenges, he was committed to the rehabilitation program. He regularly participated in therapy sessions and support groups, beginning to rebuild his life with a new perspective. Seeing her gradual transformation was like watching a flower bloom after a long storm. The house, once disorganized and neglected, now had visible signs of care and renovation. Volunteers and friends had helped with repairs and cleaning, making the environment more welcoming and healthy for both. The heavy and oppressive atmosphere gave way to a feeling of hope and renewal. I looked back and realized how a simple act of kindness at the supermarket had triggered a series of transformative events in that family's life. The decision to help the boy with his shopping had been the first step in a journey that brought support, love, and care to him and his father. I was grateful that I followed my intuition that day. Experience has taught me that, no matter how small it may seem, every act of kindness can have a profound and lasting impact. The transformation in their lives also brought a change in me, reinforcing the importance of acting with empathy and compassion. Seeing the boy and his father on a path of recovery and growth was an indescribable reward. I felt a deep satisfaction in knowing that I was part of this story, helping to build a brighter future for them. As I walked away from that renovated home, a sense of peace and fulfillment washed over me, reminding me that sometimes all it takes to change someone's world is a simple act of kindness. Months later, I visited the family again. The boy, now more smiling and confident, welcomed me with a hug. The father was sober and was starting to look for a job, determined to create a healthier environment for his son. The house, previously disorganized, now showed signs of care and hope. Reflecting on the entire experience, I realized the depth of impact a simple act of kindness can have. Helping with grocery shopping was the catalyst for a series of significant changes in that family's life. This made me understand that we should never underestimate the power of a generous gesture and the importance of following our intuition when we feel something is wrong. This story is not just about one family's transformation, but also about how each of us can make a difference. Small actions can trigger big changes, and it is our responsibility to be attentive to the needs of those around us. Kindness, empathy, and a willingness to act can transform lives, including our own. When I left the house, I felt an inner peace. He knew that, although the road was long, the boy and his father were finally on a path of healing and renewal. And I, having followed my intuition that day in the supermarket, had learned the invaluable value of acting with compassion and courage.